What made you make the decision to write this book?
I think it was the late Corrie ten Boom that said, if we should never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God. And I think my story really resonates with that, because I was born in obscurity in a tiny village in Guyana, South America. My journey began in such a way that for me, later I realized that God was writing my story. Like any other teenager or young persons, I had no clue what my life would be like. I told a story in my book about how after I had graduated from high school, my neighbor, who is one of my mentors, suggested that I apply to become a student teacher. And I showed up. First thing, I didn't even know how to show up for that. I didn't know how to dress. No one had ever taught me about, how to speak to people or how to answer questions. I showed up to that interview I was so nervous. I totally forgot what the title of the position was. I fumbled around, and by God's grace, I got that student teaching position. And I did my best. Then after that position, I realized that there is something else somewhere. And I started asking questions of people, but my parents were both high school dropouts. My parents never graduated from high school. They did not have the information or the ability to direct me towards a path of academic vigor. However, I was blessed with other people in my neighborhood who came and mentored me and suggested things for me to do. Now, that time when I was about in my 16 or 17 or so on, the Jim Jones massacre occurred in Guyana, South America, where I'm from. And I started feeling disillusioned and worried about my future. And another thing that happened was that my parents were leaving, they were immigrating to the United States of America. And so I was looking for a way to, find myself. So my journey took me to Barbados. And it was there that I found who I really was. I love writing, I love nature, I love interacting with my surroundings, I love people. And I wrote copiously about my adventures there. And then, like every good story, something rocks your world. And my world was rocked. And I got the message that I needed to come to America right away. My parents had earlier immigrated here. And so it was in that crucifix of not knowing what to do with that sad situation, I started to think that maybe there's something beyond myself that I needed to turn to. And that's where I started edging my bet. Okay, if there's a God there, then he would get me through this immigration process. He would help me figure out, how to get from there to there. And he did. I came to the United States, armed with nothing but fear, sadness, and not knowing my bearing. But by God's grace, I had aunts and uncles here who knew the Lord. And they were very, very instrumental in guiding my path. Not only did they know the Lord, but they valued just like my foreparents did, education. And they guided me through that. Now, people ask me, how did you come to write your book? And you must know that I had written all my life, but I hadn't, because of my background, I never knew that I should maybe study journalism when I went to college, because that was not a thing for me. I needed to find a way to get out of poverty, because I'd heard back home that that's the way out of education was the way out of poverty. And so when my cousin said, okay, you need to take the ACT or the SAT, I said, okay, what is that? They said, okay, you can find it in the Barron's ACT book or SAT book. Okay. So I went, I bought the book, and I started reading and studying and reading and studying. I found out where the exam was being taken. I went and I took that exam. Now, you asked me, where did I get that spunk from? And later on, I would learn where I got the spunk from. Then I went on to college, met my husband, the final year of college, and we got married, made my way to Africa, of all places, Ghana, came back. Then we moved to Springfield, Illinois, after living in Chicago and Evanston and all that, and then came to Springfield. And I'm gonna read you what happened. We ended up having 3 beautiful girls, and they were being grown up in this Springfield environment. And here is what the catalyst for Carol's closet is. Isaiah is my second-born child. She said her first complete sentence at the age of 18 months. Her language acquisition was exceptional for her age. As she matured, she became the classic mediator between her siblings. She is the peacemaker in our family. She's prone to be verbose. A discussion with her often had my head spinning. Mom, if you were given the opportunity to live without your arm or legs, which would you choose? She would query. Honey, I have to think about that. And how come we don't get to sleep over at our friends? She would ask for the umpteenth time. Or, how come you don't let us call you June? And how come we have to address adults as Mr. and Mrs.? My friends don't do that. Then that question will be followed by, and why are we the only ones in this subdivision? And why did you all stay in Chicago? I would repeat the usual answers, but as the years went by, I knew that I had to be less casual with my responses to her precocious ways. The simple answer were that we are immigrants. We did not do sleepovers. The concept was alien to us. Why do our children need to sleep over when they had their own beds? We finally made the compromise and allowed our children's friends to sleep over at our place. When my husband and I left town for a weekend away or to attend a conference, we allowed a select number of people to host our kids. Over the years, I have regretted not being more amiable considering Isaiah's desires. It was not much later that Isaiah became more reticent and did not engage in friendly banter with me, only with her sisters. She later confessed that she was looking for answers to her feelings of otherness. She could not understand why her mom was so different from her friends' moms. Being the only minority kid in her school, in church, and in most places, she often felt frustrated, and when she was among her peers, she wondered why her family was the only one of color in her subdivision. She felt lonely most of the time. Then one day, our life changed. Essence and Ebony showed up at our doorstep. Our world suddenly expanded. Asaya often was the first to comb through the mail for these monthly subscriptions and headed upstairs to her room with them. She stayed up late at nights, consuming the beauty and fashion of the people who looked like her. This was transformational for her identity, her self-expression, and the sense of pride in her blackness. I would sneak out of bed, she said, so that I did not wake my sisters, and I'd devour every page like it was candy. The first time she took a magazine to school and showed it to her classmates, they asked, "Why are all those people in that magazine black? Where are the white people?" These images of the black magazines reflected all kinds of beauty and broke down the hierarchies that she saw every day in our world. Her standard of beauty would forever be changed. Deep within her, she knew that she could be dared to be different. Asaya started designing her own style of clothing and experimented with her own unique fashion and wardrobe. She described her dilemma and how she felt as she came of age in Springfield. "I love to dress up, but not like my contemporaries. I love music, all kinds of music, especially reggae, Bob Marley music, the blues, the calypso music. Actually, during my teen and early adult life, listening to music kept me alive. I often wondered, why do my parents not listen to these cool rhythms? I wondered why my mom never spoke about the Guyanese, Caribbean soccer vibes. I love this stuff, she mused. I love dancing to all kinds of music. Why don't my parents dance? Every time I asked my mom about her past life, she changed the subject." Asaya continued her search for her own identity and meaning in life. She is, by nature, a curious individual. Her favorite pastime was to snoop around my closets, looking for interesting information. One summer during her visit, she stumbled upon a scrapbook. "What? Is this my dad? Oh, cool. My dad was so young. Look at these funny comments." She had found her dad's high school scrapbook, and she was so excited she could not wait for her dad and me to return home from her out of town. She insisted that her dad explain every photo. She peppered him with questions about why he said that and what did that comment mean. Her dad smiled from ears to ears and then said, "Asaya, life is too short." When I got to secondary school, I had to make a decision between being an average student or aim to be top of my class. I had to choose success. That's how I was able to make it this far. As Asaya spoke about finding her dad's scrapbook for months, she discovered a piece of the puzzle of her existence. She had learned how to center the outside voices of her peers and landed on the reality that diversity was awesome. So years later in her life, when she was looking for answers to her uniqueness, she stumbled upon my photographs. She was determined to find out what her mom looked like as a baby and as a young girl. "Oh, look at that. Is this my mom? That's exactly the way I want to look. Oh my, that's why I'm the way I am." Asaya discovered these treasures. She felt elated and empowered. She had asked the question in a number of ways. Who is my mom? And so, in retrospect, I was ashamed of my beginnings. I was ashamed that I grew up poor. We lived in a one-bedroom hut. My parents slept on the bed. My sister and I slept on the floor. My two brothers slept in the living room at night. We had an outhouse and we had a detached kitchen. You come to America as an immigrant, and the only thing you know is that you should study hard, you should get good grades, and that's the way you can succeed. I never spoke to my children about my past. I was about the American dream. Now, in retrospect, my childhood was so rich. Number one, I had a father and mother that loved us. My dad rode 24 miles every morning, 5 days a week, from Buxton Friendship Village to the capital to work. He came home and he planted the largest vegetable garden in my village so that he could augment whatever he got from his job. And not only that, on weekends, my dad's dream was to build a big house. So on weekends, he would start building the house from scratch. He would invite his friends and his relatives to come over and help him build this house. And by the time I was in high school, that house was finished. My mom, on the other hand, used whatever was in her hands to take care of us. She became the best pastry maker, the best black cake maker, the best wedding cake maker in my village. My mom was the most beautiful person you can meet. She never knew a stranger. She was a healer. She was a person that gave everything to you. And she was so kind and conscientious, and so she had so much beauty in her that when she made things with her hands, it showed. Now, why didn't I want to tell my kids about that? Because we come to America and you are told that if you live in the biggest house, in the finest neighborhood, you look a certain way, you drive a certain car, that is success. I decided, after I found myself, after I found Jesus, after he gave me my life and my purpose, that I'm going to spend the rest of my life debunking that. I am going to spend the rest of my life teaching the young people of this nation that each of us has a purpose. God has given us each a purpose. When we find that purpose, I don't care who you are. I don't care what color you are. I don't care what side of the track you came from. If you know Jesus and he's found you and he's given you that purpose, when you walk in it, that is success.
Amen. Thank you. So can you share with everybody though, based on that perspective that you just provided, why it was so important for you to write your story?
Okay. Our stories matter. And when in the book I wrote about how my daughter approached me, I was lying in bed, just feeling so proud of myself, Oh yeah, I've made the American dream. My husband and I are successful. Our kids are successful. They're in college. I don't have anything to worry about. And she comes in with tears in her eyes. She throws my journals next to me on the bed, and she said, "Mom, I don't know you." And I said, come, baby, what are you talking about? She said, "Mommy, look at this. You are a writer, you're an author. You met my favorite author, James Baldwin, when you were in college, and you've never said a word to me. You know how I love writing. You know how and on and on." And I'm like, this is really sad. I didn't even think about it. And I apologized to her. And that was it. Went back to my life. And then the pandemic strikes. I was home with nothing to do, nothing to think. And then since she had resurrected those journals with my stories, a few of them were lying on the table. I looked down and I said, oh, what is she talking about? I opened one of my journals and the light bulb went on. She was right. I am an author. I'm a writer. God had given me a gift. And I, because of my pride and my wrongness in thinking, I felt like I shouldn't even tell anybody about it or do anything about it. And so I prayerfully repented, sat down there, and ladies, I know now that when the Holy Spirit guides human beings, they write things like the Bible. Because Carol's closet, I had no idea that I was a writer. When I sat down and started putting this thing together, it was like I was on a roll. Every day I disciplined myself. I would sit there and start writing, and it was like a dream. The first publisher I sent my manuscript to accepted. Where does that happen? It doesn't happen often. I have a thing out there with all the steps that you have to go through and all that kind of stuff. But I knew then that I needed to write my story because my children needed to know my story. They needed foundation to know who they are. And when you give your children foundation to know who they are, it gives them a sense of being, wholeness. And so I would like to encourage each of you here, if you like to write, if you like to do journals or whatever, do it and then publish it. Because the next generation need to know what you went through. Could you imagine that each of you that are sitting in this room have gone through so much that our children have never went through? You went through the .com movement, you went through the first cell phones, you went through the first everything. And so that information needs to be out there because you are the ones who need to tell that story.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So at this point, do you want to go into Jess telling the what you would like your readers to walk away with? What's the takeaway?
Well, the takeaway from this is this. I wrote 10 things that I learned on my way to becoming an author. The first is my life could be wasted if I experienced things and did not share with my children. And you see, when I share with my children, then they have a generational story that they can pass on.
Sure.
Many of us that look like this do not have written stories. Even if we wrote stories, we didn't get them published, and we try to pass them on, verbally to our next generation. But our stories matter. 2, when you do something that comes easily, it's a gift from God. So, share it with the world. 3, there are millions of people who can benefit from reading your story. 4, our stories matter. Stories can heal wounds. I remember writing my story and finding out so much about my foreparents and my forefathers and seeing that they went through the same kind of slavery that Americans went through, Black Americans went through, and all over, and realizing, you know what? Slavery was one of the worst atrocities. And slavery would continue if we do not talk about it and how terrible it is. So the next generation need to know that that's a no-no. So when we write about it from our perspective, it's a lived experience. And no one can debunk your lived experience. God is writing our story. each and every one of you, no matter how bad it is or whatever, is writing your story. Write it down because it is his story. God is weaving his story through your life. Number 6, you are the only one in this world. You know, when I go to high schools and I tell students this, even boys tear up. You know, there's never going to be another June like me.
Right.
With all the attributes, with all the everything that look like me, the same, finger, no. So if I leave this world without telling my story, then there's nothing. You can just remember me by, she was the black girl, that, whatever. But when you write your story, then your grandchildren and others could know. And 7, 8, when you write your story, you can change hearts and others. And in my story, I was very deliberate because what I've experienced in America is that people are not necessarily racist. People are ignorant about one, who they are, who the God that they serve, and what purpose they are to be in this life. A lot of people, I realize that America has allowed itself to be separated. You separate by the pros and the cons, the vax and the unvax, whether you're white or black, whether you're rich or poor. And that is a recipe for disaster. You could never be the United States of America until you address certain things. And when you and I write our stories, I wrote in my book all of the experiences that I've had with the work that my husband and I are doing in Ghana. There is no way we can do that work, just the two of us. I wrote about people that I've met that would, after their retirement, they would spend hours and hours and hours doing stuff for people that the Lord placed on their hearts that they would never see. But the people are either hungry somewhere else or something, and they're trying to do what God told them to do. And that is to think about your brothers. And so when I tell my story like that, people have a different perspective about their purpose in life. And they can go in that direction instead of sitting in their ivory towers thinking that they're better than those people out there. No, God calls us to go out there and sit with those people. Listen to their stories. Listen to their cares. And then you are being used by Him to make a better life. Okay? And then we are supposed to write to speak truth to power. You see, when you write down things that you've experienced and the life that you've lived, no one can tell you that, no, you're not feeling that. I have chapters in there about racism, and I explain through a story about a black man dying and a white man needing the black man's skin to save his life. And how pertinent that was. So in a society where we live, where color is everything, how do we benefit from refusing that black skin because of what people would say than saving a life? And it shows how we need to start thinking, taking off the blinders and the ignorance, and to see that, one, God designed everyone. I said in my book, let us embrace the toss salad mentality. What is a tossed salad? It's a dish that has different ingredients, different colors, different shapes, different flavors, and everything. And you toss them all together and you put them in your mouth and mwah! Imagine a world where we are allowed to be individuals. We are honored and blessed and encouraged to be who we are. And yet we are loved. And so that is the kind of America that we should all dream about. And so when you write your book, you put things like that in there. And you share it with your children. You don't share hate with your children. You don't share division with your children. And finally, Jesus was a master storyteller. So I want to encourage you to be like Jesus. Tell your stories. And that's all I'm going to say.
Thank you for passionately sharing your story.